It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Tuesday edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Also, of course, as always, huge shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. I very much do appreciate it. And make sure you check out RealAgriculture.com. Great resource for all things agriculture, agronomic content, current events, stuff on trade, farm management, like loaded. So make sure you check that out. Also, the Real Agriculture podcast feed as well. Okay, today we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm broadcasting today from Great Falls, Montana, and going to be going to an event here later on today. You're going to hear all about tomorrow on the show, but so I'll save that for you for till tomorrow. But today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to do a bit of a deep dive. We're going to have one guest today, okay? We got one guest, deeper interview, longer form. We're going to, instead of being so rushed, a little bit of a longer narrative here today. And this is kind of a unique one, somebody I've never actually talked to before, never interviewed. Michael Grunwald, who's an author, also contributor to the New York Times. And he has a new book out that is called We Are Eating the Earth. And he's written a number of different agriculture-related articles, or essays, I should say, for the New York Times. And they've stirred the pot. Probably that's one way to put it. And he says some things in some of his essays that, you're going to disagree with. I disagree with. But there's other things that he says where it's like, hey, you know what? That is actually fair. I'm there with you. So that's kind of how this interview, you're going to hear that today. Is kind of probably it's going to have a whole bunch of mixed emotions. Hang with us. I didn't get the point from Michael that he was somehow like a Michael, well, he's not a Michael Pollan sort of like agriculture is just bad, period. That is not the kind of person that he comes across as. He makes some points in terms of the value that agriculture has in terms of not only feeding the U.S. and feeding Canada, but really feeding the world. And it's going to come with some consequences, and some consequences that we need to be a little bit more honest about and a little bit more in tune with. And he also has some recommendations for what agriculture needs to do maybe going forward with some of its messaging. So Michael Grunwald is the best-selling author of two widely acclaimed books, The Swamp and The New Deal. He's a former staff writer for the Washington Post, Time Magazine, and Politico, and winner of the George Polk Award for National Reporting, the Worth Bingham Award for Investigative Reporting, and many other journalism prizes. He lives in Miami, and like I said, he also now is a contributor to the New York Times. If you have any feedback on today's show, I think this is going to stir up some opinion today. You're going to have some thoughts from me, and some of you are going to be like, yes, some of you are going to be angry, and that's okay. We can have this kind of discussion here today as it applies to agriculture, its impact on the environment, and its ability to come through on its promise to make sure that it's feeding the world. So you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. You can also find Real Agriculture across all the different social media platforms. Encourage you to check us out. And please comment, provide your perspective. I want to hear it. I want to hear your perspective, okay? So let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to get into my conversation with Michael Grunwald, author of the new book, We Are Eating the Earth. Be back right after
this. At Alliance Seed, our premium varieties of wheat, durum, barley, and oats are crafted to fit the unique needs of your farm. By choosing Alliance Seed, you're selecting reliable seed that enhances your production potential and boosts your bottom line. Discover how our top-performing seed products can elevate your fields at allianceseed.com or call us at 1-877-270-2890.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh!
You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify.
If you only listen to RealAg Radio, you only get half the picture. For greater insight into the issues that affect farming, tune in to RealAgriculture.com. Crops, livestock, machinery, farm management, and the markets, even food and travel. Real Agriculture Online digs deeper into the topics that affect the way you work and live. So get connected today. Read, watch, and listen to the people who know at RealAgriculture.com.
You know, one of the things I want your feedback on is, do you like this format on Tuesdays? I'm thinking about maybe through the summer months, rolling with this. It could be a little bit slower news-wise, although it hasn't felt that way up until this point, let me tell you. But I'm thinking through the summer here, maybe we'll do on Tuesdays more of a longer form interview. So let me know what your thoughts are on that and if you like what we're doing here today. This segment's brought to you by Ag Expert. Deep in the fields and deep in the data to back up your decisions on the farm. Get started at agexpert.ca. Okay, let's get to my conversation with the author of the new book, We Are Eating the Earth. It is Michael Grunwald. Michael, it's great to chat with you.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Shaun. This is great.
Well, you know, so interesting here. Guy living in Miami, super interested in what's going on in the world of agriculture. What sparked this curiosity? And you're kind of deep dive into what's going on in the sector.
Well, the short answer is I've been a policy reporter for 30 years and really written a lot about environmental issues for probably 20, which included climate. And as writing about the climate and the environment, I was writing a ton about energy, about fossil fuels, about solar and wind and electric vehicles. And, you know, the too long don't read version is about 6 or 7 years ago. I realized that food is about a third of the climate problem. It's a much bigger percentage of our water pollution and water shortages and biodiversity problems. And I didn't know squat about it. I was spectacularly ignorant. And I realized that if I was ignorant, you know, and I wrote about climate, that probably a lot of others were in my world as well. And in many worlds. So really that sort of was the beginning of a 6-year dive into this stuff. And now I think I'm slightly less ignorant.
I'm super curious with your understanding going into this learning versus where your head is today. I'm assuming you had some perceptions that were, you know, discarded. Maybe, you know, maybe it confirmed some things you thought. Like, talk about that process from beginning to end in terms of some of the big takeaways.
Well, I think like I said, I came in so ignorant that I think the good news was I really didn't have a lot of misconceptions or any conceptions at all about what I was going to find, other than I knew that, agriculture was a big deal, and that people weren't paying a lot of attention to it. You know, like I said, it's probably a third of the climate problem. It's 3% of climate finance. And I don't know, maybe 1% of climate conversations. So really, my first stumble into this was I realized I didn't know if meat was bad for the climate. I knew everybody kind of said it did, said it created problems. And I called a sort of agriculture and climate guy I knew, and said, "Hey, is meat really that bad for the climate?" And he said, "Yes." And then he said, "Duh." But of course, then he explained that it's not so much meat in general, that beef has a much greater impact on, forests and wetlands and carbon emissions, than chicken or pork. And that really was the beginning, again, like this idea that I didn't know squat. I'd read Michael Pollan. I had some of those ideas about, what sustainable farming is. But I really came out after talking to a couple thousand people and traveling around the world and visiting with farmers, as well as visiting with ag tech and food tech, and politicians and you name it, came out with really, sort of different perspective on this stuff.
So one of the things you point to is that industrial agriculture is often really unfairly demonized. Yet you've talked about some of the significant environmental downsides or issues that the industry has been really working on. So can we do both? Can we do industrial agriculture, commercial agriculture, and also be conscious of the environment?
Well, that's part of what I'm pushing for, that we need to make even more food with less land and less mess. And again, the title of the book is We Are Eating the Earth. And that really is the big takeaway, because agriculture is what's eating the earth. And when I say that, sometimes farmers get their back up, right? And it's kind of like, oh, we're feeding the world. And I'm like, yes, we need to eat. And the fact that agriculture is making a mess, we should try to have it make less of a mess, but, you are supplying what we demand. Now it turns out that, we are going to need 50% more calories by 2050. We cannot keep expanding our land because, like I said, right now, 2 of every 5 acres of this planet are cropped or grazed. People in my world, we talk about urban sprawl, right? Our cities and suburbs that are expanding and taking over nature, our highways and driveways. That's 1% of the earth. Agriculture is now like 38, 39% of the earth. So agricultural sprawl is a much bigger deal. But again, we need to eat. So it's sort of how can we make more food with less land? And again, I try to be agnostic about how we can do it, but that does mean we are going to need high yields. We need to make more food per acre so that we can use less acres to make food. And look, industrial agriculture, factory farms, one thing factories are really good at is making a lot, manufacturing a lot of cheap commodities on a grand scale. And so, I'm not saying that it all has to be industrial agriculture, but I think the people who dismiss industrial agriculture because we don't like the way it treats people, or we don't like the way it treats animals, or, uses too many antibiotics, or creates pandemic risks, or we don't like, the politics of some of the ag lobbies. Look, we are going to need a lot of food, and industrial ag is really good at doing it. If other forms of ag can make, have high yield, high production, high efficiency, that's great too. But I don't think we should, hand wave away the industrial guys either.
Yeah, and the affordability. Right now we're talking a lot about food affordability in the U.S. and Canada and other places. That fits into it too. Well,
right. You make more. That's one way. If you increase the supply, you decrease the price.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us, who think our food materializes on grocery shelves, we take that cheap food for granted. But if there are a lot of alternatives out there that people talk about that have lower yields, and they may do some nice things for the soil. They may do a lot of nice things. But again, if you're making less food, it's going to be more expensive, and you're going to need more land to feed the world.
Well, you mentioned Michael Pollan earlier, and he's somebody that pushes a lot of stuff in this space. One of them is, going full regen, almost turning back the clock to a prior time in terms of how food was produced. You talk about how, well, you're critical of that push, and the fact that maybe carbon farming has been wildly oversold. Talk about some of your findings there.
Sure. I mean, well, first, there's this kind of kiss the ground, common ground idea that if we just do regenerative farming and other kind of we treat our soil nicely, that essentially all that carbon that our fossil fuels have pumped into the sky is going to magically be repatriated into our soil. And that is mostly bullshit. Not 100%. But, the fact is, even if you could measure it, which is really hard, even if you could be sure that if you're storing more carbon over here, you're not losing more carbon over there, which is also really hard. And the fact is, to store a lot more carbon in your soil, you're going to have to put a lot more nitrogen into your soil. And that has climate issues of its own. So I think even I just did a debate at Berkeley with a professor of agroecology, and even he acknowledged that, some of these kiss the ground notions that we're just going to fix global warming by farming differently, that is bogus. But even the regenerative agriculture, I write about in some areas where regenerative practices can contribute to really excellent yields. I went to Brazil to a ranch where they're using, they've got a feedlot, they're fertilizing their pastures. Michael Pollan wouldn't be happy about that, but they're also planting cover crops and doing no-till and integrating their cattle with the cover crops and, rotational grazing. And they have spectacular yields. So more power to them. Where I do kind of really part ways with Pollan and a lot of the other kind of regenerative advocates all over the political spectrum is this kind of notion that there's this kind of good farming, this sort of old style farming that was more natural and kinder and gentler and didn't use chemicals and, weren't these monocultures. And that was kind of good for the environment. And now we have these evil industrial, drenched in chemicals, monocultures and, the animals have numbers instead of names. And this is all terrible and evil and bad for the environment. And I don't want to exaggerate. Like there is some kind of, these kind of Michael Pollan's bucolic, rustic farms. There is an environmental cost of intensification and turning them into, more modern, large scale industrial farms, in terms of, and we've seen it with water pollution. We've seen it with air pollution. There is definitely, there's something is lost. But what I'm trying to point out is that the big environmental loss is the initial transformation of nature into agriculture. That is like the transformation of the American prairie or American forests, right? Indiana was 85% forested. That transformation into the Michael Pollan's romantic, valorized, ideal, nostalgic farms, that's where you lost the carbon. That's where you lost the biodiversity. And then, yes, there are some additional losses as you intensify. But I'm trying to point out that, if you really care about the planet, the idea should be limiting agriculture's footprint, not limiting agriculture's, impact on the land in that particular acre. Because if you're making less food on that acre, you're going to need more acres of food.
Yeah. We've got more of my conversation with Michael Grunwald, author of the new book, We Are Eating the Earth, when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Mazik Seeds and Lallemand Plant Care.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is a video series that showcases the latest in canola research and production agronomy. Learn from some of the best at your own pace through quick and timely producer-focused videos available on our YouTube channel. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is the quickest way to keep up to date on all the latest in canola production. Boost your canola IQ with the Canola School, brought to you by BASF, and visit canolaschool.com.
Here today on RealAg Radio, you're listening to my conversation with Michael Grunwald, contributor to the New York Times and author of a new book, We Are Eating the Earth. We're going to continue with that, but first I want to tell you about Genesis Fertilizers. They're making real progress toward providing reliable, locally produced fertilizer. Join the ownership group and protect your bottom line. Learn more at genesisfertilizers.com. Let's continue my conversation with Michael Grunwald. So, do you think the industry, and if you can't comment on this, just let me know, but do you think the industry has done a good job of telling the story of what you have found out and discovered through your research? Not everyone's writing a book about this. So we've got to, it's got to be more scalable in terms of the comm. So what would you say about how the industry has approached this topic?
I mean, no. I mean, is the answer. I don't think they've done a good job telling their story. And if I'm honest, I think in many ways, and this is not every farmer, but I think the industry hasn't done a good job, right? They've done a great job of providing food, but they haven't done it as sustainably as they could. And they have, used their political clout, to lobby against, the kind of sort of common sense regulation that I think would end up actually, as long as there's a level playing field, I think would really be good for all of agriculture and would have less of a target on its back. Even if that target isn't now, I wrote about how for instance, I wrote about Denmark, where the ag industry was kind of like, we got to do something because they're coming after us and they want to get rid of all of our pigs and cows. And we do it really efficiently. And they had not told that story. And, sort of 5 years later, they've done a really massive agricultural reform that is going to tax their emissions and is going to require them to return a lot of land to nature, but is also going to provide a lot of benefits to them, is going to, help them make even more food, help them adopt, kind of greener technologies, drought tolerant crops and drought tolerant livestock. I just think there's a lot of room for a kind of grand bargain where the world helps agriculture make even more food and agriculture kind of agrees to make less of a mess. But yes, I think it is true that, agriculture, partly because people have just sort of become inured to this idea that like, oh yeah, we're feeding the world. Yeah, we've heard that again and again. But partly, and this is, this will maybe get some of your listeners angry, but I do think you hear again and again from farmers like we are good stewards of the land. We care about stewardship. And that is often true. But I think you have to acknowledge that collectively agriculture is stewarding a mess. It's using 70% of our fresh water. Fertilizers are the reason that there's a giant dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico and algal blooms in the Great Lakes. And, it's nitrous oxide emissions from fertilizer and methane emissions from burping cows. And of course, it is the leading cause of deforestation and wetland destruction. It is eating the earth. I think there hasn't been as much of an effort to grapple with that. And so I understand people get upset. I have this line about how in some ways every farm is an environmental crime scene, right? That it's
that seems like a bit of an overstatement.
Right. But it is this kind of, because it's kind of this echo of the nature it replaced. That's what I'm trying, that every farm has a kind of obligation to make as much food as possible because it's using that land that could otherwise be nature. And I think a lot of farmers do a really great job of that. And I think farming is really hard work. And the farmers I've met are really smart people and really good businessmen. But I do think that there is a kind of sector-wide obligation that has not always been met. And I think the answer is not to demonize farmers, but the answer is to try to come up with a sort of political as well as technological solutions that are going to work for everybody.
Yeah, it's the trouble is with this topic, there's nuance. Right. Like, so.
Yeah. And this is the story of my career.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like trying to, like, if your expectation is that, getting back to that Indiana example where 85% of the state originally was forest.
Right.
If our goal is to have that and have the food production that the state of Indiana currently produces, well, good luck.
Yeah, exactly.
There has to be a major shift in terms of technological advancement that we don't even foresee at this point in order to make that happen. So you mentioned technology.
Yeah.
And
you know what?
Go ahead.
If I could point out, because that's I think is like a really great point. And I think one way that the sort of agricultural, whether it's the lobby or sort of advocates, have done the industry a disservice is through all this talk about how agriculture shouldn't be the problem; it can be the solution.
Interesting.
When the fact is, like, agriculture makes a mess. And I write about how, like, the Anthropocene, right? This notion that when humans really started transforming our environment. That began with the introduction of agriculture. It has always made a mess. I think it should try to make less of a mess. But this idea that agriculture is going to somehow be pristine is not like we need agriculture because we need food. And we should try to limit that mess. But we shouldn't pretend that it's somehow like it's going to have no effect on the land. And I think that's like by creating those kind of unrealistic expectations, I think that's just unfair to farmers. I think we should be working together to do the best you can because you provide a product that we absolutely need.
Yeah. You've been listening to my conversation with Michael Grunwald, author of the new book, We Are Eating the Earth. I think in that part of the interview, there's a part where you're going to be a little bit, excuse me, every agricultural operation, every farm is an environmental crime scene. Seems like a bit hyperbolic. And I tried to push back as much as I could or thought was appropriate. I think, what I learned through this discussion, and Michael really, he made me aware of this. It's all relative to where you start. If your idea as an environmentalist is to put agriculture back to how the land was found in 1825 or 1875, depending on where you are, that's unrealistic. And so therefore it would be looked upon as something they got to call CSI in on. But the reality is if you compare it to 1970, you're probably feeling a lot better about, how the industry is doing relative to the environmental impact and taking into consideration the productive output as well. We're going to take a break. We've got more of my conversation with Michael Grunwald coming up right after this. Built on over 100 years of seed innovation and unwavering commitment to farmers, Pioneer 100 Series canola hybrids deliver a step change in yield performance and agronomic traits. This isn't just better canola, it's different canola. Pioneer 100 Series. Contact your local Pioneer sales representative or visit pioneer.com/100 series to learn more today.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
You've been listening today to my conversation with Michael Grunwald, author of the new book, We Are Eating the Earth, and continue to want your feedback on what you've heard today in the discussion that we are having. You can do that by sending me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, and don't forget about Ag Expert. Deep in the fields and deep in the data to back up your decisions on the farm. Get started at agexpert.ca. Okay, next with Michael, where we go is, what about the incentives? Are there, and one of the things that has always confused me, and maybe I'm just not sharp enough, is climate accounting and some of the mathematical equations that are used in terms of the costs and the benefits of certain outcomes. But are there ways that we can incentivize farmers in the future to move in a direction that society has deemed to be, and the industry agrees is the right path? You can have good messes if you want to stick with the mess. It's like my desk. There's some days where it is such a mess. I can't find anything, and it is a total disaster. And those are days where it's just kind of like organized mess. And it's
and you should, to the extent that your mess affects others, and the climate does affect all of us, there should be some cost to the mess, and that would create more of an incentive to reduce the mess. And that is a lot of what I hope my book was fun to read. I tried to make it about fun characters, but and the sort of dirty secret is that a lot of this is about kind of incentives and accounting. We have not, in our climate accounting, or really any accounting of the way we look at agriculture, we have not put a fair price on the land. For a lot of it, it has been looked at as if it were free. and land is not free. Land has a cost and an opportunity cost. And I think that if we put the right incentives in place, where, you can make more money if you use less fertilizer, if your cows burp less methane, if you have alternatives to chemical fertilizer that provide the same kind of yield bang for the buck. I just think like right now, those incentives are not in place. And to the extent we're starting to have these carbon markets, they would tell you, like I write about these farms in Brazil where they used to be degraded and they'd have like 1 cow per 5 acres. And now they've been transformed. So they have two cows for 1 acre. And so it's, 10 times as efficient. But from a carbon perspective, if they wanted to get paid in the carbon markets, they'd be smart to redegrade their land. Because right now they're using a little more fertilizer and their cows, they have more cows, so they're burping more methane. So it makes it look like they're worth. But of course, they're saving the Amazon. If they're using 1/10 as much land, they're deforesting.
But that's the difference between like including productivity into your mathematical, like versus like aggregate. Like, okay, the entire industry is using X much, more fertilizer. Yeah, but also 5 times the yield. And
exactly.
You got to incorporate productivity.
That's absolutely right. Right. And look, I mean, fertilizer is a hard problem, right? Because half of it is wasted and nobody wants to waste it. But it's like people say about advertising, right? Half of it is wasted. We just don't know which half. And so it's a really hard problem, but it's, that's one where we want to give farmers the incentives to use less, nitrogen. And look, that's something where, it shouldn't all be voluntary. Probably there should be, so you can imagine some sort of, command and control regulation that also puts the hammer on farmers and forces them to seek innovation, to seek, best practices. But in the end of the day, it's got to be profitable for farmers to make a shit ton of food because that's what we need them to do. And that's providing a service for all of us. That's how you can have a podcast and I can write books and other people can be doctors and bankers and influencers or whatever. They are feeding us. And for things I say that sometimes farmers get angry, I never forget about that we really do owe them a great debt. And that it's in all of our interest to make sure that they can do what they do best, to just do it with as little impact on the climate and the planet as possible.
Yeah, technology, gene editing. There's a lot of focus right now on biologicals, whether that's biopesticides or, fertilizer enhancements or being able to deal with crop stress. What were some of the emerging technologies that you were like, wow, okay, this is pretty darn important?
Yeah. Well, I should first of all say, like, I'm pro, right? There are a lot of people who I think, and you see it on the left and the right? You see it on the, there's some from the Michael Pollan, hippie, foodie people, but also now you're seeing it from the Bobby Kennedy, Joe Rogan, the kind of like those kind of anti-tech bros. And I am not there. I think technology has, like you can use a hammer to build a house and you can use a hammer to kill your neighbor's dog, right? Like technology can be used for better and for worse. I have this device in my pocket that I can look up any fact known to mankind in seconds, and I can video chat with anybody anywhere in the world and also use it as a flashlight. That is awesome. And it is one of the most exciting parts of my reporting for this book was meeting these really incredible people working on these really important problems. And they're smart and they're coming up with cool things. So yes, a company like Pivot Bio, which, is tackling this fertilizer problem and saying like, hey, they're gene editing microbes. Ooh, terrible. Gene editing is bad. I don't understand why it's bad. It seems fine to me. They're editing these microbes so that they can fix nitrogen from the air and feed it to crops. And right now they're replacing about 20% of the fertilizer on farms in the United States and the Midwest, and they're on 5 million acres. So that's a start. It's still like 1% of 1% of the global fertilizer load, but that's a start. And if they can keep the yields up and replace some of those chemicals, that's a win. I heard about Greenlight Biosciences, which is using the mRNA technology behind the COVID vaccines to literally constipate potato beetles to death. And again, it's like instead of like bombing your field with chemicals, it's like sending in Jason Bourne to just kill the bad guys, and it's again much better for the environment. It doesn't last. And if this kind of stuff can spread, I'm all for it. I went to the University of Illinois. These guys are using supercomputers, artificial intelligence, and sort of modern genomics, gene editing, and they are reinventing photosynthesis. Right? Here's this, process that's been around for like a couple billion years and is responsible for life on Earth. And these guys are like, you know what? It can be more efficient. And they are editing out some of its inefficiencies. And they think in 15 years, they might be able to increase crop yields 50%. So there are all kinds of, look, I can be a real bore at parties, right? When I start talking about biological nitrification inhibition or some dude in Nepal who's on a shoestring budget is trying to chemically treat rice straw so that it can be a really good animal feed. But, we have like 400 million tons of rice straw and we grow a lot of rice. So if you could actually, use those residues instead of, basically wasting them, that could be an extraordinary, we could eat a lot less of the earth. We could use, have a lot fewer methane emissions, and use a lot less water. These are really exciting technologies that, I don't think people should, people like, oh, I don't want to eat technology. I think, it's not like the corn that we grow today, if it's not GMO, is exactly the way indigenous people grew it. And, the modern cow is not really like the ruminants that were roaming around the Great Plains. So I think natural is one of those eye of the beholder words. I'm more interested in, can you make more food with less land and less mess? And if it takes technology to do it, fantastic. I'm for that.
Yeah. We're to continue with my conversation with Michael Grunwald, author of the new book, We Are Eating the Earth. When we come back, you're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here, and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Today we've been digging deep into the new book, We Are Eating the Earth, with the author, Michael Grunwald. Let's continue the conversation.
I'm for that.
Yeah, well, and we do have technologies coming to the market. Like you mentioned methane emissions from cows, where we're able to have feed supplements that back off that amount. And what's always been so bizarre to me is that people want it both ways. They don't want the environmental impact of agriculture, but when we do have technology solutions to try to minimize that impact, it's like, I don't like that either.
Exactly.
Then it becomes like what you really don't want is you don't want cows to be used for food, is what basically what we're trying to encourage here.
Exactly. And I have to say, I see that on the food side also, including from some people in the agriculture business, right? Where it's like, when you look at, for instance, these alternative proteins, right? Like the fake meats, which have not done fantastic in the marketplace because so far they have not tasted as good and has not been as cheap. But I hear a lot of people who are just like, ew, that's gross. I don't want to eat technology. People should just eat, plants. They should just eat kale or lentils or beans or whatever. And it's like, well, yeah, maybe they should, but they don't. So if we can use technology to provide a product that, if theoretically, with the kind of investment and, development, you could imagine fake meat and certainly cultivated meat grown from actual animal cells, you could imagine it tasting as good and ultimately getting as cheap as these kind of inefficient animals that have hooves and tails and, reproductive systems and breathing and pooping and all stuff that doesn't make meat. You could imagine that becoming, good and tasty, and they would use like 95% less land and 95% fewer emissions. That would be awesome. But you have all sides of the political spectrum and what I guess I'd call the kind of agricultural spectrum, where there are these kind of agricultural ideologies. You have everybody dumping on this stuff like, oh, it's processed food. It's, it's not natural. It's, you can find a million things that are wrong with it. But I think, make it better. That would be that's exciting to me.
Yeah, I think when I think about this topic, I find a lot of people, when we get into some of the discussions or the points that you're just making, it's like we're searching for that. Like, there's one way of getting from the source of the food to the consumer. And, it's for a while there was like, it's going to be vertical farming. We're going to have vertical, and then we'll be able to take all this farmland and put it back to its original state, and we'll have all these skyscraper vertical farms that'll be able to feed people in the cities. Well, that's not happening. It's just one example. And
I'm proud to say that I was crapping on that while people were investing billions.
Okay, good.
I was like, this isn't going to work.
The beauty is the consumer is diverse, and there's lots of different ways to get to have food production and food delivery to whether it's somebody in Miami or somebody in Minot or in everywhere in between from a population standpoint. That's right. I think we sometimes fail to recognize that.
Yeah. And what I'm really hoping is this again, like I came into this book cold. But what I started to realize as I got into this is that yes, like the food and ag world is divided into these, no pun intended, into these silos, right? Yeah. Where you have the industrial people and the regenerative people and the organic people and it's gotta be natural people. But nobody's talking to each other. And in some ways, nobody's really grappling with the numbers and the facts. And I came into this and I was kind of like, I'm not going to be ideological. I'm going to be mathematical. I tried to lay out some facts, and what I'm finding, as we're, in the run up to publication, is I'm having these really great conversations where we're finding some real common ground, not like the movie Common Ground, but and you can see how there are things that industrial agriculture can learn from regenerative agriculture and vice versa. And then I think in these discussions, that there are, I'm trying to kind of isolate what the problems are, rather than dictate how we're going to solve them, because then I think all of these different solutions can, come at these in different kinds of ways. And there can be progress in different parts of the system. What I have said, look, I write about, I think probably 20, 30 different really promising solutions, but none of them have really made a lot of traction yet. We have not made a lot of traction on these issues. And in some ways, it's because the political system and even in some ways the agricultural system hasn't really grappled with them. And so what I'm trying to do is grapple. I'm saying, I put out this book to say, let's talk about this stuff. This stuff is really important. For a lot of us, people who live in Miami, people who live in New York, San Francisco, right? The middle of the United States and, rural Canada, it's flyover country, right? You look out the window and see all these squares and circles and think that's not my world. But we vote on these issues 3 times a day. So I'm really trying to, encourage people to hey, let's pay attention to this stuff. And because again, and this, I know not everybody in ag world really cares about the climate, but they should, because the climate cares about you. And it is, it's going to start affecting agriculture in terms of droughts and floods and yields and all that stuff. But it also really affects everybody. And so, I have gotten some pushback where it's like, oh, you're so logical, you're rational, you're mathematical, but isn't this stuff moral? But I'm really trying to make the case that, like, yes, this is moral. Feeding the world is moral. Protecting our forests is moral. That this, like, I'll be fine no matter what. But the, people living in the floodplains in Bangladesh, or indigenous people in the Amazon, or smallholder farmers in Africa, this stuff really matters. And I just, again, I think it's like a conversation that needs to, kind of escape ag world, but also involve ag world so that everybody's talking about it.
Yeah, I've often thought, or my perspective would be, growing up in the ag sector, that farmers care about the environment, but it's not an ideological religion. Like it's not like, and so I don't know if you're nodding, so I think you understand what I'm saying. Like it's not the issue that defines them. Now there are, depending on which sector, part of agriculture, the meeting or conference you're at, you're going to hear different levels of environment. Like I'm always amazed when I go to like a rancher meeting, and half of the agenda is about preserving wildlife and caring for this almost endangered bird. And what do we do to, rebuild the habitat and, some of the grazing techniques. And it's sort of like, okay, like this is a fabric, but they wouldn't consider themselves like raging environmentalists, but they are walking the talk. And so I think sometimes I think that's how people perceive agriculture, is like, well, environment's not important to them. It is. I think it's just not communicated the same.
I think that's right. And look, I mean, I think it's absolutely true. And farmers, they have to care about their land because it's their business, right? I mean, their business depends on keeping their soils healthy. And I do see, like, a lot of them hunt, a lot of them fish, a lot of them do care about their local environment. And I think, and a lot of them care about feeding the world, not just in an abstract way, but they understand that they are providing food and fiber and, calories and protein for the world. And that's like, I think that's something they should take pride in. I also, look, now everybody's gonna, now here come the pitchforks. But I think in some parts of ag world, there's a little bit of an entitlement mentality, where it's like, we're the good guys, we're the heartland, and for some of them, they are doing their best, to reduce their, whether it's nitrous oxide emissions or, dump less poop into the streams. But there is this feeling that, like, I'm feeding the world so I can do X. Or certainly the government shouldn't tell me not to do Y. And honestly, I think, sometimes, like, there's going to be a place for carrots and there's going to be a place for sticks. In the United States, there's this very generous subsidy system, and a lot of farmers, it's kind of like they want the checks to keep coming, but they also don't like the regulations. And I'm sitting here saying, like, look, the world subsidizes agriculture to the tune of $600 billion a year. $300 billion is direct subsidies, just handouts. And I get it. And, it's important to have a source of affordable food and reliable food. And I get it. But I also feel like there should start to have some strings attached to these, attached to the money. And that's the kind of thing that there's got to be a grand bargain. Yeah. And it's going to be a negotiation, and farmers have a lot of clout because there are farmers in every congressional district and in every state. And farmers are providing a really important service. So they should have some clout. But that said, I think sometimes the industry, it's just kind of like, leave us alone, just keep the checks coming, and, don't tell us that we're not awesome for the environment. And there I am a little bit going to be the skunk at the garden party saying like, hey, like even if we cut off all fossil fuels tomorrow, by 2050, if we don't fix our farming some, we're going to blow through all our climate targets and we're going to create horrible extinctions. Because, again, agriculture is eating the earth and it's got to eat less of it. And that's going to require some change. And sometimes some of those changes might not be things that farmers like, but I think it can be done in a way that farmers are going to be just fine with it.
Yeah, and depending on the program that makes up that subsidy money, a lot of times there are caps on it. So it's, it's not like it's super funding these mega farms, however you want to phrase that. The other part of it, some of it is like rural stimulus, essentially, which trying to get, money goes to the farm, the farmer spends the money and it, keeps rural communities alive. But I think there is more and more a push, like what you're talking about.
It's not, it's not being done just because like politicians are corrupt or evil or anything. Right. That's not the case I'm making. What I'm saying is that farmers have a responsibility, just like manufacturers, because in a sense, what I'm sort of making the case is that they are manufacturers of food. And in some ways, there's this idea that like, when you see a new factory in your community, that's like great. And, that's creating jobs and we're supposed to be happy about that. But somehow, agriculture, I don't know, it's non-point source solution pollution. So I don't know, it's maybe some, anyway, I'm just saying that like, it's great. It's an important part of our economy. It's an important part of our world. But like everything, like everybody else, it's gonna have to change to adjust to this new world. Because this is like the planet is in danger. It's a really nice planet. It's got pizza. It's got reliable Wi-Fi. It's got breathable air. We're not going to escape to Mars. Like that's not the answer. That is not going to fix our problems.
No matter what Elon tells
Matt
you.
Damon. I saw Matt Damon was able to farm a little up there, but I'm not going to count on that. No. I'm really hoping that we can fix our shit down here. And I think, farmers are going to have to be part of that.
Well, the book is We Are Eating the Earth, and we've been talking to the author of that book, Michael Grunwald. Michael, thanks so much for joining us here today. I really appreciate it, and congratulations on the book. I could tell you very much did an intense deep dive, and you quite enjoyed the look into the industry of agriculture and food production in a much, much deeper context than you previously had. If somebody's interested in the book, where do they go?
I mean, you can get it. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or starting July 1st, it'll be at your local bookstore, but you can pre-order it right now. And I'm really grateful that you have me on. I think you have a really interesting world. And thanks for letting me be a tourist.
Hey, great stuff. Thanks a lot, Michael.
Appreciate it.
Well, there it is. There's my entire conversation with Michael Grunwald, author of the new book, We Are Eating the Earth. Now, well, I'm done talking. The interview's over. Now it's your turn. What did you agree with, and what do you have some pushback on from what you heard there from the author, Michael Grunwald? I do appreciate him doing the interview about the new book. He knows who the audience is. He knows it's farmers and ranchers. So he wants to hear from you too. So you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Also would like to get your opinions on what you think about these long-form interviews, maybe for the rest of summer on the Tuesday. Let me know what you think about that as well. Tomorrow we'll be broadcasting from a big launch event in Great Falls, Montana. And so you got to make sure you tune in for that. It's a new brand and some exciting stuff coming from BSF. So stay tuned for that tomorrow on the program. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. We'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.